There are moments in life when time slows down, not in a poetic, cinematic way, but in a way that feels like the universe itself is forcing you to absorb every second. This was one of those moments. Lorna stood in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting the strap of her red dress, her reflection smirking back at her. She barely glanced at me as she picked up her purse, casually tossing out the words that would turn my world upside down. "I'm off on a date. Try not to be too jealous." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Maybe she was joking? Maybe this was some bizarre, twisted attempt at humor? But then I saw the way she shifted her weight, the way she deliberately avoided my gaze, and I knew. This wasn't a joke. My mouth went dry. My fingers gripped the edge of the kitchen counter as my mind scrambled for an explanation, something that could make sense of the absurdity of what I had just heard. "Excuse me," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. Lorna let out a soft sigh, as if she was already exhausted by the conversation. "You heard me," she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "I have plans tonight. With someone else." It wasn't just the words, it was how she said them. So effortlessly, so unapologetically, as if this was completely normal. As if she had every right to stand in front of me, wearing a dress I had bought for her, and announce that she was going on a date. A date. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I should have yelled. I should have demanded answers. I should have done something. But all I did was stand there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing, in real time, that I didn't know her at all. I forced a slow breath. "And I suppose you expect me to just accept this?" Her lips curved into that smirk again, the one that had once felt playful, charming. Now it felt cruel. "I expect you to be an adult about it," she said, as if she were explaining something obvious. "We've been together for years, right? Marriage gets boring. I just want to experience more options." I let out a breathless laugh, but there was no humor in it. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and yet, outwardly, I was calm. Too calm. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice level. "You're just openly seeing someone else now? Without discussion? Without even pretending to care what I think?" She shrugged, like she was talking about returning a sweater she didn't like. "I figured you'd find out sooner or later," she said. "So why hide it? It's not like I'm leaving you." That's when something inside me clicked. I had been standing on the edge of denial, waiting for her to give me a reason to believe this was some kind of misunderstanding. But it wasn't. Lorna wasn't sorry. She wasn't even hesitant. She had already made her decision. Now, it was my turn to make mine. And something told me that by the time the night was over, she wouldn't be smirking anymore. I watched her standing there, adjusting her dress in the mirror like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just shattered the very foundation of our marriage with a casual smirk and a few thoughtless words. A date. She was going on a date. With someone else. My heartbeat was eerily steady, my mind sharper than it should have been in a moment like this. A part of me was waiting for anger to explode, to take over, to shake the walls of this house with the force of my reaction. But it didn't come. Not yet. Instead, I felt awake. I had spent the last few years in a comfortable haze, moving through life like a man who thought he had it all figured out. I wasn't the guy who checked his wife's phone or questioned her whereabouts, or played the role of the paranoid, jealous husband. I trusted her. I had no reason not to. Until now. Lorna sighed, turning her gaze back to me, clearly irritated that I hadn't reacted in the way she expected. "What?" she said, shifting her purse to the other shoulder. "You're acting weird." Weird? I wanted to laugh. Maybe I even did, a dry, empty sound leaving my throat. "How long?" I asked instead, my voice eerily even. She blinked. "How long what?" I gave her a slow, pointed look. "How long have you been doing this behind my back?" Lorna rolled her eyes, as if I were being so dramatic, as if I had just asked her something as mundane as what's for dinner. "Don't be like that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." The words bounced around my skull, echoing over and over until I wasn't sure if I had even heard them right. I inhaled deeply, gripping the back of the chair in front of me. "Not a big deal," I repeated, tilting my head. "You walking out that door, meeting another man, letting him touch you the way I do, that's not a big deal?" Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something, but then she hesitated. Just for a second. Just enough for me to see it. The flicker of guilt, buried beneath all that arrogance. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. She rolled her shoulders back, her usual smugness returning in full force. I didn't say it wasn't important, she said, her voice smooth, controlled. I'm just saying that this is life. People evolve. Relationships change. And frankly, you should be grateful I'm being honest about it. Grateful. The sheer audacity of it made my jaw tighten. I studied her, taking in the way she looked at me, like I was beneath her. Like she had already moved past this moment, past me, past everything we had built together. And that's when I knew. She had been preparing for this. Maybe not this exact conversation, but the moment. The moment where she would finally stop pretending, finally say the words out loud, finally make it real. I took a slow step forward. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. You're not the woman I married, I said quietly. Her smirk widened, like she had been waiting for me to say that. Of course not, she said, her tone light, casual. People change. I've changed. Maybe you should too. It was like she was talking to a stranger, like I was the one being unreasonable here. I exhaled through my nose, keeping my emotions on lockdown. And what exactly do you expect me to do with this information, Lorna? Her brows lifted, as if the answer was obvious. I expect you to accept it. She took another step toward the door, glancing at her watch, checking the time. Like this was just another appointment in her day. Like I was just another obligation she had to get through before moving on to more exciting things. She had already made up her mind. And now, so had I. I straightened, my posture going rigid, my hands unclenching. Go, I said simply. That caught her off guard. Her head tilted slightly, her lips parting in surprise. She hadn't expected that. You're okay with this? I smiled. Not the kind of smile she was used to. No, I admitted. But you already made your choice. Now it's my turn. Lorna hesitated, her fingers twitching slightly at her side. For the first time tonight, she looked nervous. Good. She turned without another word and walked out the door, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt suffocating. I didn't move for a long time. Didn't rage. Didn't break anything. I just stood there, my mind racing faster than it ever had before. Because while she thought she was the one in control of this situation, she had no idea what was coming next. And by the time I was finished, she wouldn't be smirking anymore. The silence stretched around me long after the door clicked shut. It wasn't just a regular silence. It was the kind that seeps into your bones, the kind that makes a place you once loved feel unfamiliar, almost haunted. Lorna had walked out like she hadn't just ripped our marriage apart with a smirk and a few careless words. I'm off on a date. Try not to be too jealous. The sentence kept playing in my head, over and over, like a broken record. Each time I replayed it, the weight in my chest grew heavier. I looked around the house, the home we had built together. The framed photos on the walls, the scent of her perfume still lingering in the air, the half-empty coffee mug on the counter from earlier that morning. Everything felt the same, and yet, nothing did. I sank into one of the dining chairs, rubbing my temples as my mind raced. How long had she been planning this? How long had I been living in blissful ignorance, thinking we were just another married couple navigating the usual ups and downs? Had she been seeing this other guy for weeks? Months? Years? I wanted to be angry, wanted to feel the kind of rage that would make me punch a hole in the wall, break something, scream into the void. But I didn't feel any of that. All I felt was clarity. She had made her choice. And now, for the first time in a long time, I had a choice too. A different kind of response. Most men in my position would have confronted their wife immediately. They'd demand answers, demand the truth, maybe even beg for an explanation. But I wasn't going to do that. Lorna wanted me to react. She wanted a scene. She wanted to see me unravel, wanted to see me prove that I was the pathetic, predictable husband she had already written off in her mind. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I took a slow breath and reached for my phone. I wasn't calling her. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. An unexpected conversation. Hey, it's me, I said when the line picked up. A pause. Then a familiar voice. Eli. I hadn't spoken to my brother in over a year. Not because of some dramatic falling out, but because life had simply pulled us in different directions. He had moved out of state, built a life of his own, while I had sunk deeper and deeper into the routine of marriage, of work, of responsibilities. I need a favor, I said, cutting straight to the point. Another pause. Then, what kind of favor? I hesitated, gripping the phone tighter. I just need to get out of here for a bit. Eli exhaled. You okay? Was I? I wasn't sure. But I wasn't about to explain everything over the phone. Not really, I admitted. But I will be. There was silence on the other end, then finally, "Come on over." I hung up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door, not bothering to lock it behind me. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I'd be coming back. A reality check. The drive to Eli's house was longer than I remembered, giving me too much time alone with my thoughts. Lorna had never been the kind of woman to settle for an average life. She always wanted more excitement, more adventure, more attention. Maybe I had been blind to it before, or maybe I had just convinced myself that I was enough for her. Clearly, I wasn't. By the time I pulled into Eli's driveway, my decision was already made. I wasn't going to chase her. I wasn't going to fight for a woman who had already walked away from me in her mind long before she walked out that door tonight. I was going to do something she never expected. I was going to let her go. And something told me that, in the end, she would regret it more than I ever would. I sat in my car for a while before knocking on Eli's door. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the otherwise quiet street. It felt strange. This wasn't where I was supposed to be on a night like this. I should have been at home, maybe watching a late-night show with Lorna, or reading in bed while she scrolled through her phone. But instead, I was here. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. A part of me wanted to turn back, drive home, pretend none of this was happening. But I knew better. Lorna had made sure of that. She wanted me to be powerless. That's what this was all about, wasn't it? The smirk, the casual dismissal, the way she had strutted out the door without a second thought. She wanted me to feel like I had no control over what was happening in my own marriage. But she was wrong. I wasn't some lost puppy waiting for her to come home. I wasn't going to crumble under the weight of her choices. No. If she thought she had control over how this story played out, she was dead wrong. A brother's perspective. I finally stepped out of the car and knocked twice. The door swung open almost immediately, and Eli stood there in a hoodie and sweatpants, looking at me like I had just shown up from another planet. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, stepping aside. I walked in, taking in the familiar surroundings. It had been over a year since I'd last been here, and yet, nothing had changed. The same old leather couch, the same stack of books on the coffee table, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. Eli shut the door and studied me. "All right," he said, crossing his arms. "What's going on?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Lorna's cheating on me." The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else's story. Eli's expression darkened. "Are you sure?" I scoffed. "She told me herself." He blinked. "She told you?" "Oh, not in a confession kind of way," I said bitterly. "More like a mocking kind of way. She stood in front of me, put on a dress, and said she was going on a date. Just like that. No shame. No hesitation." Eli let out a low whistle. "Wow. That's... yeah." I exhaled sharply, sinking onto the couch. That's where I'm at right now. For a while, he didn't say anything. He just sat across from me, tapping his fingers against his knee, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "So, what now?" I had been waiting for that question. The shift in power. That was the thing about betrayal. At first, it knocks the air out of you, leaves you feeling hollow, directionless. But after the initial shock fades, you're left with a choice. Be the victim or take control. I refused to be the victim. I leaned forward, meeting Eli's gaze. "I'm not chasing her," I said. "I'm not fighting for her. I'm not begging her to stay. I'm just done." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" I shrugged. "What's the alternative? Sit around and wait for her to come home, pretending everything's fine? Try to win her back while she's off entertaining someone else?" He nodded slowly. "You're right. She doesn't deserve that." "No, she doesn't," I agreed. And yet, there was a part of me that still felt the weight of it all. Not just the betrayal itself, but the sheer casualness of it. She hadn't even tried to hide it. She had looked me in the eye and dared me to react. That wasn't just infidelity. That was cruelty. And cruelty like that didn't come from nowhere. "She's been planning this," I realized out loud. Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" I ran a hand down my face, piecing things together. "She didn't just wake up today and decide to cheat. She's been pulling away for months, staying late at work, making excuses, treating me like an afterthought. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. That realization should have made me feel worse. But strangely, it didn't. It made me angry. Because suddenly, I wasn't just some guy whose wife cheated on him. I was a man whose wife had spent months orchestrating his downfall, and she had expected me to just sit back and take it. The unexpected message. Just as I was about to say something else, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, my stomach twisting slightly when I saw the name on the screen. Lorna. Eli leaned forward. Are you going to answer that? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, finally, I swiped to open the message. Hey, don't wait up. I might be late. I laughed. Actually laughed. A short, bitter sound that filled the quiet room. She still thought she was in control. Still thought I was sitting at home like a fool, waiting for her to come back. Eli peered at the screen. Well, she's really just all in, huh? Yeah, I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket. But so am I. Because what Lorna didn't know was that, by the time she came home, she wouldn't be walking back into the same life she had left behind. No, she had made her choice. Now, it was my turn to make mine. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of rage, or sadness, or heartbreak. No, those emotions had already burned away, leaving something colder, sharper in their place. I was thinking, planning. By the time dawn crept through the blinds of Eli's guest room, I had mapped out my next moves in a way that would make Lorna's carefully constructed plan seem amateurish. She thought she had control. She thought she had me figured out, the devoted husband who would sit around waiting for her to come home, maybe even grovel for an explanation. But what she failed to realize was that, for the first time in our marriage, I was the one pulling the strings. The shift in power. The first thing I did that morning was call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, the best. Eli had connections, and within an hour, I was sitting across from a man who practically smelled like victory. His name was Malcolm Greaves, and his presence alone could intimidate the devil. So, Malcolm said, flipping through the folder I had brought with me, your wife is having an affair, and she's under the impression that you're just going to, what? Wait for her. Seems like it, I said. Malcolm smirked. People like her always think they're untouchable. Until they're not. I liked him already. I laid everything out, the way Lorna had smirked when she told me she was going on a date, the slow withdrawal over the past few months, the arrogance, the lack of remorse. Malcolm listened intently, nodding every so often. Then, after a long moment, he leaned back. This can work in your favor, he said. You haven't confronted her yet, which means she still thinks she has the upper hand. That's good. Let her believe that. The less she suspects, the cleaner this will be. I exhaled, tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying leaving my body. This was happening. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting. Homecoming. That evening, I returned home. I expected the house to feel different, foreign, after everything that had happened. But it didn't. It felt the same. She was the one who had changed, not me. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The air was thick with the scent of her perfume. A reminder that, not long ago, she had stood in this very space and told me, with a smile, that she was leaving to be with someone else. I moved through the house, taking everything in. The framed photos on the wall, the neatly arranged bookshelves, the throw blanket draped over the couch. A life that was already crumbling, even if it didn't look like it yet. Then I heard it. The sound of her key in the door. Lorna stepped inside, tossing her purse onto the counter like she hadn't just spent the night with another man. She froze when she saw me. Oh, she said, surprised. You're home. She wasn't expecting me to be here. That much was clear. I smiled, leaning casually against the kitchen island. Where else would I be? She studied me for a moment, as if trying to gauge my mood. Trying to see if I was about to explode, break down, beg. I did none of those things. Instead, I tilted my head. How was your date? A flicker of something passed over her face, but she covered it quickly, smiling sweetly. It was great. Thanks for asking. I nodded, as if I actually cared. Then I gestured toward the dining table, where a stack of papers sat waiting. Her gaze followed my hand, and the moment she saw them, the smirk vanished. What's this? She asked slowly. I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to sit in the moment, to feel the walls closing in. Then, finally, I spoke. Divorce papers, I said smoothly. Figured I'd save you the trouble. Her lips parted slightly. She wasn't prepared for this. She had expected a fight. She had expected drama. She had not expected me to be the one calling the shots. You're serious? She asked, her voice quieter now. I nodded. Completely. She let out a breathless laugh, but there was no humor in it. So that's it. You're just done. I pretended to think about it, then smiled. Yep. She stared at me, and for the first time since this all began, I saw panic in her eyes. She had been so sure that I would fight for her, that I would beg for her to stay, that I would be too broken to walk away. She had underestimated me, and now she was realizing it. But it was too late. I turned, heading for the stairs, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. Because she wasn't worth another second of my time. Lorna didn't say a word as I walked past her, but I could feel her eyes on me. The tension in the air was almost suffocating, like a storm just waiting to explode. I could hear the shallow hitch in her breath, the slight tremor in her exhale, signs of a woman who had just realized she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. I made my way upstairs, every step echoing in the quiet house. Our house. At least for now. When I reached our bedroom, I locked the door behind me. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a conversation. She had said all she needed to say the moment she smirked and told me she was going on a date. Everything after that, irrelevant. I sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling slowly. The day had been long, exhausting in ways I hadn't expected, but there was something freeing about this moment. I had made my decision, and she knew it. That alone gave me an upper hand she never anticipated. The sound of movement downstairs told me she hadn't stormed out yet. She was lingering, probably trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor. Lorna was good at that, twisting narratives, making herself look like the victim, turning situations into something they weren't. But this time, she had no leverage. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my messages until I reached Malcolm's name. The conversation from earlier flashed on the screen. Make sure she doesn't suspect anything until everything is finalized. I smirked. She didn't suspect a thing. A knock on the door broke the silence. I ignored it. Another knock, this time more insistent. Still, I didn't move. Finally, her voice came through. Elliot. I closed my eyes briefly. She only used my full name when she wanted something. What? I said, my tone flat. A pause. Then, can we talk? I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head, even though she couldn't see me. Talk. Now she wanted to talk? I had given her every opportunity to communicate before, to tell me if something was wrong, to be honest about what she wanted. Instead, she had chosen to humiliate me, to treat me like an afterthought in my own marriage. And now, the moment she saw I wasn't groveling for her, she wanted a conversation. Typical. I stood up, unlocking the door but not opening it. If she wanted to talk, she could do it on my terms. The second the door cracked open, she pushed her way inside. She looked different now. The arrogance from earlier was gone, replaced by something else, uncertainty. Good. She folded her arms, tilting her head slightly, trying to regain control. So, you're just ending things? I met her gaze, unflinching. Yeah. She exhaled, shaking her head. Come on, Elliot. This is ridiculous. I almost laughed. Ridiculous? She had walked out of our house like a queen on her way to a feast, parading her infidelity in front of me like it was nothing. And now she had the audacity to call this ridiculous? I crossed my arms. What exactly do you think is ridiculous? That I'm not begging you to stay? That I'm not groveling for your attention? Because if that's what you were expecting, you seriously miscalculated. Her lips parted, caught off guard. For the first time, she looked like she didn't have a perfectly rehearsed response. I thought we had an understanding, she muttered after a beat, her voice quieter now. I raised an eyebrow. An understanding? She hesitated. Marriage isn't black and white, Elliot. It's not some fairy tale where two people stay completely devoted to each other forever. People evolve. Things change. And I thought. She exhaled sharply. I thought you'd at least be open-minded. Open-minded. I shook my head, laughing under my breath. Let me get this straight. You think a real marriage means I should sit back while you go out and have your fun? That I should just be okay with you dating other people while I stay at home, like a loyal pet? She frowned. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. A flicker of frustration crossed her face, and for the first time, I saw her mask slipping. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she muttered. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. No, Lorna. You made this harder the second you decided I wasn't worth the truth. Her jaw clenched. So what now? We just throw away everything we built. I tilted my head. You already did. She flinched. A small reaction, but I saw it. I exhaled, finally feeling the exhaustion settle in my bones. I had nothing left to say, nothing left to give her. The divorce is happening, I said. If you want to pretend this is a shock, go ahead. But don't stand here and act like you didn't choose this. Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, she turned on her heel and walked out of the room. This time, I didn't watch her go. I didn't care anymore. Because for the first time in years, I was done fighting for something that was already gone. The moment Lorna left the room, the weight of everything finally settled on my chest. But it wasn't grief. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even rage anymore. It was liberation. I ran a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. The house was silent now, save for the distant sound of Lorna moving around downstairs. I could hear the clink of glass, the shuffle of her shoes against the hardwood floor, little signs of a woman trying to process the unthinkable. In her mind, I was supposed to fight for her. She thought she had me so wrapped around her finger that I'd be desperate to keep her, to convince her that what we had was worth saving. She never once considered that I might have already let her go. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside, the street was quiet, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows over the pavement. It was strange how normal everything looked when my entire world had just shifted. Then I heard her voice. Soft at first, muted. I turned my head slightly, realizing she was on the phone. At first, I wasn't going to listen. I had spent enough time caring about what she had to say. But something about her tone made me pause. It wasn't the confident, smug voice she had used with me earlier. It wasn't laced with the usual arrogance she carried like a shield. No, this voice was shaken. I moved closer to the bedroom door, keeping my footsteps silent as I cracked it open just enough to hear. I don't know, she whispered harshly. He's not reacting the way I thought he would. I froze. My grip on the doorknob tightened as my stomach twisted into something cold, something sharp. Who was she talking to? And why did she sound worried? She let out a frustrated sigh. No, I didn't think he'd be happy about it, but I at least thought he'd put up a fight. He just agreed. It's like he doesn't even care. She paused. Then, softer, almost uncertain, she said, "What if I miscalculated?" I nearly laughed. Miscalculated? That was the first intelligent thought she'd had all night. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, letting the conversation continue. There was a long silence, and then she let out a sharp breath. No, he doesn't know. Why would I tell him? That would ruin everything. Another pause. Then, her next words sent a slow, creeping fire through my veins. I'll handle it. Just stick to the plan. The plan. Of course, there was a plan. I should have known. Lorna wasn't the type to risk anything without having a safety net in place. This wasn't just some impulsive decision. This was premeditated. And I wasn't supposed to react this way. I was supposed to beg. I was supposed to argue. I was supposed to be so emotionally wrecked that I wouldn't notice the trap. Too bad for her. I wasn't the man she thought I was. I took a quiet step back, exhaling slowly. My pulse was steady, my mind clearer than it had been in years. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was a game, and she thought she was the only one playing. I turned, walking back to the bed and picking up my phone. If she had a plan, it was time I made one of my own. One she'd never see coming. I had spent the last few days watching Lorna, piecing together the puzzle she never expected me to see. She had a plan. She had set this up long before that night, long before she stood in front of me and smirked about her date. And the worst part? She had been so sure of herself, so confident that I would react exactly how she wanted me to. But now, she was starting to sweat. I noticed the little things first. The way she hovered around her phone, checking it constantly. The way she'd start to say something to me, then stop herself, hesitating in a way she never had before. The way she stayed home more, almost as if she was waiting for me to explode, to finally give her the fight she had been counting on. I gave her nothing, and that terrified her, because I wasn't acting like a heartbroken husband. I wasn't screaming or threatening or begging. I was calm. And people like Lorna? They don't know what to do with calm. I let her stew in it for 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, I set the final piece into motion. I waited until she was out of the house, then made a few calls. I met with Malcolm again, finalizing the last details of the divorce, one that, thanks to my lawyer's expertise, left nothing in Lorna's favor. I had the house, the assets, and evidence of her infidelity carefully prepared in a file that ensured she wouldn't be able to fight back. By the time I was done, there was no escape route left for her. She walked into her own trap. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. My keys were on the counter, a single glass of whiskey in front of me. The front door opened, and Lorna stepped inside, stopping short when she saw me. There it was again, hesitation. She was nervous. Good. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. Her jaw tightened, but she did as I asked. I watched her carefully, taking in the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers fidgeted against the table. I slid a folder toward her. She stared at it. What's this? Open it. She hesitated, then reached forward, flipping it open. The moment she saw what was inside, her entire body went still. You've been planning this, I said casually, leaning back in my chair. I figured it was only fair that I planned something too. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her fingers tightening around the paper. This is the divorce papers. I cut her off smoothly. Finalized. And since I was the one betrayed, I made sure they worked in my favor. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not sadness. Not anger. Fear. She never thought she'd lose. She never thought I'd be the one to take control. She started, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said. I don't care what excuse you had. I don't care what your plan was. I don't even care who he is. I leaned forward slightly, dropping my voice. I just care that you get the hell out of my house. Her breath hitched. Elliot. This was your choice, I reminded her. You wanted freedom? You have it. You wanted to date other people? Congratulations, you can do that somewhere else. She blinked rapidly, her fingers curling into fists. You don't understand it. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said coldly. You thought I was weak. You thought I'd fight for you. That I'd be so broken by this that I'd play right into whatever script you had prepared. I tilted my head. But you miscalculated. Silence. Then, finally, she let out a shaky breath and laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter, breathless, the sound of someone who just lost everything. She shook her head. I guess I did. I stood, grabbing my keys. Pack your things. You're leaving tonight. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded, looking down at the papers again, as if trying to comprehend how she had ended up here. She had been so sure she was in control, so sure that she held all the power. But in the end, she had played herself. And I walked out that door, free.